afternoon, everyone. This is High Point Mayor Pro Tem Michael Holmes calling to order a special meeting for our budget session. Present with me today are all members of council, minus Council Member Johnson, and potentially joining us virtually will be Mayor Jefferson and Councilwoman Monica Peters. First item up is an adoption of our agenda, and this time I will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Councilmember Moore, seconded by Councilwoman Cook. Any discussion on the item? All right, hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right, item on our agenda today, item 2024-196, City of High Point proposed FY 2024-2025 budget. Staff will provide information on the City of High Point proposed 2024-2025 budget, and we will have Stephen Howlerick, Budget Performance Director. Before Stephen gets started, this is a public, for those listening, this is a public meeting. The public is invited. However, any statements, comments, or questions will be reserved for our Monday, May 20th meeting during our public hearing. So just wanted to make sure that we established that at this point in time. So if there's nothing else, Stephen, take it over.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Holmes, and good afternoon to you and members of the council. Just want to kind of give an overview of kind of what we prepared for today. And I do, the way these work sessions have worked in the past, if there are questions, you don't need, there's a slide at the end that says questions, but before, during, after the presentation, anything that pops up, feel free to kind of jump in, and staff are here, we'll answer what we can, and what we can't, we'll provide responses next week. So the topics we're going to talk about today, we're going to get a little bit more about the public safety pay adjustments that are in the proposed budget. We're going to provide a little bit more information on the mayor and city council expense allowance. We're going to talk about the proposed fee schedule changes. We touched on them a little bit last week during the first budget presentation. We're going to go a little bit deeper, kind of what's going on with those proposals. We're going to also go through the capital improvement program. We're not going to go project by project, but some of them that are kind of broad-based. We're going to try to give you some examples of what this is and kind of what some of the renovations and improvements that are scheduled or what the funds are going to be utilized for. And then we're going to also talk through a couple tax rate reduction scenarios. There's a handout with you about fund balance. It's not in the slides, but we'll talk about that. Bobby's here also if there are any questions regarding that. And then we'll talk about next steps and the calendar. And so starting things off with public safety pay adjustments. We showed a slide last week kind of showing the proposed increases and a little bit of history that's happened with police and fire pay. We want to talk a little bit about the methodology that was used and also look at some comparisons with some of our competing jurisdictions. And so the positions studied were certified firefighters, sworn law enforcement officers, and telecommunicators. And so the market was measured by the entry point. And what that means is the minimum starting salary. If you read an article in the newspaper about Greensboro is increasing police pay to a certain number, that's almost all the time referencing the minimum starting point. And so that's what we mean by entry point. Results found that High Point was behind some key competitors, specifically Winston-Salem and Greensboro. And the proposed budget includes increases for police at 2 grades of the pay plan, fire at 1 grade of the pay plan, and it was found that the telecommunicators were kind of above the market, and so there were no change proposed for those. The changes were made to ensure equity between the ranks, which means, we usually show police officer and firefighter as the example, but higher ranks are also included, up to but not including assistant chief and chief. And so this slide kind of shows what's going on with police officer. So their current grade is grade 29, which has a minimum starting pay of $49,325. And the proposed 2 grade increase would bring that minimum to $54,380. You see where High Point would be with the increase, kind of second among these comparison jurisdictions. Prior to that, we would be below Winston-Salem, and so that's kind of where it brings us to. The total cost of this, including benefits, is $908,000 for the full year. And I will note that Greensboro and Winston-Salem have not released their budgets for next year. I believe next week is when their budgets will be going out, so there's a chance this information is outdated, by the end of next week, but this is the data we had and what was studied, kind of where things are for the current year.
I'm sorry, Steve, did you say 908 or 989?
908 for police.
Members of council, one other item to note is we do know that Winston-Salem is currently in the process of conducting a pay study. So we anticipate that there would be some movement of that 52 at some point in the next year. We're just unsure of the timing as the study is currently underway.
If I may interject something, and you will expound on it, Madam Manager, explain how we do our analysis of our departments. Briefly, as you shared the other week, last week, I believe, maybe a week before.
Sure.
Just so we know that there is some difference in the way we do it versus others.
Absolutely. So each year, the City of High Point has traditionally studied a third of our workforce. We study a third of our workforce. So in a 3-year period, we're looking at all of our positions over 3 years versus looking at our positions all at one time and having some large gaps where you might not have any adjustments that are made to staff. If we realize that we have certain segments that are moving a little bit faster than others, for instance, we had some significant movements around public safety over the last 3 years, then we do look at market analysis where we'll just look at groups of those positions, like in this case, police, fire, telecommunicators, just to make sure that we're remaining competitive. So we might look at those positions more frequently than every 3 years, and that's what we're seeing here. Just because of the rapid movement with public safety, there's a need for us to make sure that we're studying those a little bit more frequently. But we'll do that with other positions if we realize that there's a lot of movement in that area. So we want to make sure that we still continue, and that's included in our budget where we're looking at a third of our workforce every year. But we realize that based on what's happening in the realm of public safety, that we've had to be a little bit more aggressive with looking at those salaries, which is why we did the market analysis and provided this information as part of this budget document. What's helpful for us is when we look at it this way, it avoids the city having large swings in our pay bands, where you go for 3 years and then you have to try to catch up the entire organization in 1 year versus just trying to address a third of the population in each budget, which is what we've traditionally done here. And I would recommend the council continue to do that method moving forward.
Thank you.
Madam Manager, this particular analysis, this is based on what we believe is competitive in the market and not necessarily our position in the pay market, correct? So even if Winston does come back and they say they're going to move past that 52 or whatever standard that we're at, this is the recommendation that we're fixed at right now. There won't be any movement on our number.
Our number will not move, regardless of what those a neighboring jurisdiction may do. This is a recommendation that we have for High Point. Now, if there's significant movement kind of in the market of the sector overall, then we may need to do another market analysis just to make sure that we're remaining competitive. But we feel like with the adjustment that we're recommending here, High Point would still be competitive, even with some of the other moves that are making. We realize those jurisdictions are a little bit bigger, which is why we always make sure that we're looking at things from a regional perspective. And what we've shared here, look at our competitors that are here in the triad, but we actually do benchmarking to some other municipalities that are not right here in our triad region to make sure our salaries are competitive. And we feel like we're well within line with that even broader cohort of cities that we use as part of the market analysis. But I think a lot of times when we think about where people can quickly drive to work for other organizations, it's usually your neighboring communities that are in close proximity to you. So we want to make sure that we're competitive in that realm.
And just, I will note before I go to the next slide, the picture-in-picture is blocking that last on the bottom of the graph, that's Guilford County. So just for everyone's reference. Similar graph, but this is now for firefighter. So the firefighter current grade is grade 27 at a minimum of $44,737. Proposed 1 grade increase to grade 28, which would be a minimum of $46,975. And so would have us third, but just below Greensboro, but above Winston-Salem. that lower bottom one is the town of Kernersville. And the total cost on the fire end of this proposal is $325,000. That's all we have on the police and fire adjustments, but if any questions come up as we go throughout, we can circle back. The next area we wanted to just touch a little bit more on the mayor and city council expense allowance. And so I just kind of reiterate what we talked about last week. In September of 2008, there was a council action which tied increases in the mayor and council expense allowance to the consumer price index or inflation. And so what we've done is we've looked at Southeast region annual CPI, looking at 2023 versus 2022. That number was 4.5%. We've applied it to the current mayor's expense allowance and the current city council expense allowance. So then you see the current and then you see the proposed. This next is just kind of a comparison, looking at just expense allowances for other jurisdictions. And as you can see, it varies really by.
Ooh.
Sorry, that wasn't.
Thank you, Ryan.
We'd like to recognize Councilwoman Monica Peters joining us in session.
Keeps you on your toes with that loud chime. So this is just a comparison of again, just mayor expense allowance and city council expense allowance. And it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. There are other compensation that also varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. There's salaries for these positions, but some jurisdictions offer an internet allowance. Some offer a car allowance. It really varies from each one, but we just kind of want to show, how it compares to some of these other jurisdictions. We try and look at some of the larger cities, but also the neighboring counties and also some of the kind of cities within our range of population.
Can you share what amount of council members can expense in that account? What that money can be used for?
I can research that. I don't know if anyone has the specifics on that.
Isn't the expense, is paid
It's just
monthly, it's paid monthly, that you currently receive as a monthly payout, but it's things like, if your lunches or meetings that you want to attend, or if there are like small things that need to be purchased for a meeting, then that usually comes out of the council expense.
So it's not something that we apply for reimbursement?
No,
or?
no, not at all. If you're traveling as part of a conference, then you would fall under the city's reimbursement policy for those things. But if you're meeting with a constituent, you go out and get coffee, and you want to make sure that you have something to cover that, that's usually just part of your expense. So you don't have to turn in receipts for those things as part of the monthly stipend that you receive. And one thing that I do want to highlight with this is that when we looked at council compensation as part of last year's budget, we did a more in-depth look to benchmark the city of High Point with other cities and other jurisdictions that you see listed here, where we looked at expense allowances, car allowances, as our budget director mentioned, technology allowances, health insurance, to see how High Point compare with those jurisdictions. And the change was made, of course, to salaries last year. And then at that time, we were not aware of the policy from 2008 on adjusting the allowance based on the CPI. So that is why you're seeing this as part of this current budget. But that policy, again, only applied to the expense allowance.
Madam Manager, do you have any insight into how other municipalities approach this issue? I know the last time when we made adjustments last year, there was a 15-year period between the time the last adjustment had been made up into that, which I think precipitated a pretty exciting headline in the newspaper. But what is typically a policy that on adjustments? Are other municipalities annually looking at this, or is it just per council direction to take a look at this item?
It varies by each jurisdiction. Some municipalities look at it as part of their annual budget process. Some, we have a policy in place where it's tied to kind of an average merit that staff may receive. Some just, when it comes to mind, they say they want to review it and they just do it. So it really depends on what each jurisdiction decides. There's not a hard and fast rule that everyone typically does it this way, or I think a norm for this one that we've been able to identify.
Is there a preferred method from staff on how this would be approached?
The way that council would like for us to approach it, sir.
Who's the politician here?
Not I, sir. I think if, options would be really review it annually and see if there was any significant changes to similar sized jurisdictions that provide similar sized services, which is what we've done here. If council wanted to, tie it to some average associated with the merit that would typically provide employees, or I think the third, recommendation would be if you wanted to modify that policy from 2008 and have it attached to the CPI, where y'all reviewing it in that way, and have that applied to the salary in addition to the allowance. That could be another option as well, but there isn't a hard or fast rule to this.
Any questions from our newly electeds on this item before we move forward?
Yeah, Councilman Andrew, CPI is about running 3.4% on the proposed budget, moving from FY '24 to '25. The change for City Council General Fund is about 18.9. I was thinking it would sort of match CPI if that's what we just did, so I don't see where that number came from.
I think part of that also was our adjustment that we did for travel, was driving some of that number from what I recall. We are noticing that our travel has gone up somewhat with conferences that council is attending from last year, so we want to make sure that we're adequately prepared for that. So that's also just part of what's driving that increase in that budget as well, in that line item that you're seeing.
Okay.
There's also there was a timing issue. Last year, the budget was amended by council to increase the mayor and council pay. That cost was absorbed into the budget just based on kind of how that action went. And so what you're seeing as part of that increase is us not absorbing that cost, but fully budgeting for that cost. And so it was just kind of a timing and how the process worked with how the budget was amended prior to adoption.
Okay.
Okay, well, Stephen, please continue.
Next topic, changes to the proposed fee schedule, and we've kind of organized this kind of by department. And so we do want to touch on water sewer. There's a proposed 5% increase to water sewer rates. As we discussed and presented last week, some of those drivers that we've seen over the past several years in the water sewer fund and all of our city departments, higher operating costs on the personnel side, but also on the operating side, chemicals costs have gone significantly higher, supplies, maintenance and repairs, kind of ones that, more routine repairs that wouldn't, kind of meet that threshold that would be part of the capital improvement program. And then also supporting the capital improvement program, so this includes PAYGO, which includes $11.1 million in the proposed budget. And also revenue bond projects, which is the debt service on some of the larger projects. And so the planned capital improvement program has a little over $21.8 million for revenue bond projects. So we list that in the CIP, but we don't set up the budget until Public Service is ready to bring that to you all. So when they're bringing a revenue bond project, you'll see an accompanied capital project ordinance. But when finance works on the debt issuance schedule, the rate increases are helping cover the debt service on those. In addition, there is an increase to the hydrant meter deposit fee. So this is a fee that's part of water sewer, but it's separate from your kind of rates that the citizens are paying. And so this is for when the permanent meter is not available. An example of when a hydrant meter is used, street cleaning, construction, using water for construction, temporary landscaping. And so the cost of this equipment and replacing this equipment has increased over the past few years. It's kind of a theme over a lot of our equipment in all departments, and so it's just a proposed increase to the fee to kind of keep up with those costs.
What's the increase?
We will get that specific to you. Actually, I have it right here. Remember that, right?
I guess the other question is that quite a common thing apparently. I mean, I know at the Coltrane Festival, we run a hydro meter. But I assume that's a fairly frequent thing that the city does.
So the current, so there's two size hydrant meters. There's 5/8 of an inch and 3 inch. And so the 5/8 of an inch is currently $500, and the proposed fee increase is for it to go to $600. And the 3 inch hydrant meter deposit, and these are refundable deposits, is $1,220, and it's proposed to increase to $2,100. Moving on to electric, and we talked a little these probably in more detail in some of the other fee increases last week, but the first one, the base facilities charge, and so this is meant to be revenue neutral, and so what it's doing is the base facilities charge is increasing, but the fee you pay per kilowatt hour is decreasing, and so it's kind of, that's where that revenue neutral assumption comes in. On the consolidation of time of use, coincident peak, and commercial on-demand, these are on the commercial and industrial schedules. There are several different fee schedules for all of these with different circumstances. The goal is to kind of consolidate and make it more simple. This was done with residential rates a couple years ago, and this is kind of the start of doing that with our industrial and commercial fees. The Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard, or REPS charge. So this is a regulatory requirement. The fee that's collected from this is passed on to the power agency. It's in the, I think, 82 to 84 cents range currently, and it's actually going down a couple cents for residential. And so we're kind of told what this is, and then it's passed along. There's really, we're just kind of the intermediary for passing along to the power agency. And then electrical vehicle charging, and so this is a new fee. The purpose of the fee is to be the equivalent of paying about $1.38 per gallon of gas. The estimate would be about $8 to fully charge, and I'm sure that depends on type of electric vehicle and how much you need to charge. There's currently 2 deployed at the 2 golf courses, Blair Park and Oak Hollow, and there are plans to deploy some around the stadium.
Okay, go back to that, because EV is somewhat of a new concept in the arena, has been used a lot. And these stations you're speaking of, I hadn't noticed one, and don't plan on using one, but these are, we're putting these in at our choice, or is there any type of, are we doing this for competitive reasons, regulatory reasons, good planning reasons?
Well, I'll take that one. I think we've made the decision for the first 3 that we have, which Steve mentioned at the 2 golf courses and at the library. Those we took advantage of grant opportunities to acquire the equipment. And to date, we've never charged a fee for those. We have been, looked at around the stadium area to bring that amenity to the folks at Congdon Yards, the new hotel that's coming in, our guest at the stadium. And so we determined that we would pay for those through electric funds. We know that this is a kind of a burgeoning area, and that's just another amenity we can offer citizens and guests that come to that area. So this fee is a way to recoup some of the initial outlay costs, but also the operating cost of those.
Eric, just clarify, so you're saying when these charging stations are in, they'll be free to use for our citizens or those in the areas?
They have been to date.
But
Since we are purchasing these that will be deployed in the stadium parking lot.
Sure.
And they're not a grant funded opportunity. We thought this was a good time to establish a rate. And
So they planted the seed through the grant funds. Yeah, I'm not saying, that's what happened.
And what we're kind of seeing in the industry is, this is at some point, there's going to be a commercial application, but we're trying to support, as government, trying to support that until there's a critical mass and a need for a charging station like you would see at a gas station.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you for clearing that up.
Looking at Parks and Recreation, golf course fees, and so these are ranging, and this is at Blair Park and Oak Hollow, ranging from $1 to $2 increases, and this is all of the golf course fees. There's a lot of, if you're not familiar with golf, I mean, if you take the cart to ride, you pay a higher cost. If you play after 12, you play on a weekday versus a weekend, and so ranging from $1 to $2 for all of those fees. The justification and the reasoning, Parks and Recreation, wants to recover some costs. Costs to operate have gone up. Costs for maintenance, costs for chemicals, golf cart leases on mowers and whatnot. Those costs have gone up, and so trying to recover some of those costs that have gone up, but not so much that it then becomes a deterrent for play. Looking at recreation center rentals, these are in the range of $5 to $10 increases. Types of things you can rent at a recreation center: you can rent a gym, and if it could be used for citizens or a nonprofit, and so that fee is going from $35 to $40 per hour with a 2-hour minimum. You can also rent a gym, but if you sold tickets, that fee is $50 currently. It's proposed to go to $60, so a more official or larger event. You can rent an activity room. That fee is remaining at $25 per hour, but there is a 2-hour minimum. And then a large activity room, which is at Oakview, Deep River, Allen J, and Moorhead, and that's going from $35 to $40 an hour. Johnson Street Disc Golf Course, currently this is a new fee, so this would be a fee for local nonprofits, community service organizations, business, commercial, or individuals to rent out the facility. There's also a vendor fee included, whether the vendor has food or non-food, and so just provide that opportunity for groups that want to rent the facility out, but also recover some of the costs for having that. I should admit. And then looking at staff usage, and we touched a little bit on this last week, but the way the fee schedule works, it kind of ties it to what we're paying the staff that you would need. The example, if I wanted to rent out City Lake Park pool and we need the lifeguard, we're just adjusting the fee schedule to what we're currently paying lifeguards on a per hourly basis. And so for any of kind of recreation facility rentals that require that use, it's just aligning it with what we're currently paying. On the parking side, this is just adding one new fee, and this is at our parking decks. For any spaces that are non-reserved, adding a $20 per day fee during the time of the two furniture markets. This currently isn't captured, and so parking is a good resource there during the market, and so adding this fee we felt made sense, and transportation agreed. Looking at the theater, so these fees have not been increased since 2014, 2015, and these are not, if you look at the schedule and there's a concert coming or an event like that, that's a separate kind of structure. But this is if a daily corporate or a nonprofit or someone wanted to rent use of the facility. If a nonprofit wanted to use it for an event, this is just adjusting what they would pay, and there could be rehearsals, 2 performances, whether it's daily, multiple days. And so that kind of, all those different parts of the fee schedule. You can also rent the conference or the gallery rooms. And so there are different fees for that, for corporate and for nonprofits. And also at Mendenhall Terminal, the fee is not changing, but it is adding, if you rent the Mendenhall Terminal and your time of usage goes over 8 hours, it's adding kind of an additional fee for that length of time. It doesn't change the amount for a rental of less than 8 hours. And then on the transit side, the transit user card minimum deposit, so it's currently $25, but if someone was only going to use the transit system a couple of times, felt that's a burden on that user to have to put a $25 deposit down, and so transit has proposed reducing it to $5. And that is it on the fee schedule.
Thank you, Steve. Before we move on, I'd like to recognize Mayor Jefferson, who has joined us, and also for Mayor Jefferson and Councilwoman Peters, who are virtual. Do you have any questions or comments up until this point? And if so, please, you're recognized.
Mayor Pro Tem Holmes, thank you so much for that. Appreciate what I've been listening to so far. At this moment, I don't have any questions. I do know staff has been working hard to prepare a number of options for us to look at when it comes to the budget, and I'll just look forward to the remainder of this discussion. So thank you.
Mayor Jefferson.
And just FYI, on the night of budget adoption, we include kind of a package of materials, and part of that package is the actual fee schedule and what's changing. And so if a fee is not being changed, we don't just inundate you with a 50-page document, but all these different schedules will kind of have the current fee and then strike through and what the new fee will be. But if you are curious of anything we covered ahead of time, we have that information and we can provide it, but it will be, you will see it prior to voting on the budget.
Can I just make one comment so that my heart can be clear?
Sure.
Because I think it is easy to get caught up on some of the increases for things like our salary or our expenditures. But one thing that I feel very fortunate that maybe I don't need that, all of that funding. I would never want somebody to not be able to represent their city because they weren't able to take a pay cut from their job or use the gas or whatever that they have to get to all of the events. I've run around the city all day today. So I'm certainly thankful for it, but I also want to make sure that we don't cut anything from our budget that would limit somebody's future possibilities for representing. So I probably missed a few things in there because my brain was trying to work through that, but I think that is something important to keep in mind to making this an accessible opportunity for all.
Duly noted. Thank you, Councilwoman Cook.
The next section of the presentation is kind of going through our capital improvement program. And so the slides will be what was in the appendix of the longer presentation we provided last week. But I do want to provide just a little bit of detail and examples of what some of these projects are covering. And so this slide is a repeat from last week, and I will just note that on the general capital of that $3.68 million, about $2.55 million is coming from the general fund, and there's also a project that we'll talk about when we get to those projects that's funded by some other funds. The general funds contributed in the past, but it's kind of a project that's in general capital, but some of the other larger funds are contributing to its cost. And then on the transit side of that $3.7 million, that's total cost. However, we're fortunate that there are federal and state grants that help fund some of our transit capital. And so our local commitment of those capital projects is about $284,000. And so going through general capital, and I'll just note that first project, the ERP upgrade, this is an update to the current financial and personnel system for the city, $1.125 million. This is the one that's funded by contributions from the other funds, mainly stormwater, solid waste, water, sewer, and electric. The general fund has made contributions in previous years. This has been kind of piecemeal, getting the budget up due to the high cost. The commercial shared use kitchen, $350,000, and this would be used for, there's grant funds and there was some ARPA-enabled funds set aside for this project. We expect those to be for the construction facility, and we're hoping some of these, this $350,000 and potentially some more next year would go toward FF&E furniture fixings and equipment. Fire station upgrades, $350,000. That's a project that's recurring every year. Fire kind of does various projects at all the different stations depending on what their need is. Some examples of what they're planning to use some of these funds for next year. Flooring improvements at stations 12 and 13, HVAC replacements at stations 1 and 10, plumbing improvements as they're needed at all the various stations, improvements to bay doors as they're needed. And so they kind of, have a schedule of things, but also as things comes up at those facilities, they're able to tap into these funds for those improvements. On the Parks and Recreation end, the playground and equipment line, so this is about what we put into playground equipment every year. Some potential playgrounds that they hope to use some of this funding are Hedgecock, Macedonia, and Moorhead Recreation Center. But Mr. Tillery was clear that it's, what will be replaced next year will only be as far as the funding takes it. And so this is why we're, it's kind of every year's capital plan, we're just putting $75,000 back in. And then a couple down from them, the Parks and Recreation Deferred Maintenance Program. This is kind of a catch-all for just things that were deferred over the years that, may not be at that, $85,000 or $100,000 cost, but it still meets some of our capital thresholds. And so some potential uses of these dollars, the entrance fence at Oak Hollow Golf Course, some improvements to the Oak Hollow Marina Boathouse, and some bathroom renovations at Washington Terrace Pool. And so Mr. Tillery kind of sees what the need is and how much it costs, and these funds are able to kind of help him cover some of those deferred maintenance needs so they don't turn into larger capital projects down the line.
Stephen, on the line outdoor courts for
Yes.
parks improvement, is that repair, new courts?
Talking with Mr. Tillery, it was a resurfacing of the Allen J basketball court, and also looking at the tennis courts and potential conversion of some of those courts to pickleball.
Yeah, yes. That's what I wanted to hear. That's what I wanted to hear. Okay, thank you.
Councilman Andrew, a question. So commercial shared use kitchen, I see the word commercial. Is this intended to be a revenue generating entity once it's all up and online?
The plan currently is, once constructed, we will have an agreement with an operator, and how that agreement will look is yet to be determined, but I think it's meant to, if not, not cost the city money. The operator may have where they're making money, and we'll be, responsible for some of the utilities, and probably the major renovations. But the purpose is for not to, I think, be a burden on the city. It's to, kind of get it up and running, and then have an operator kind of run it, because they're, the subject matter experts on how to run a commercial kitchen. And then kind of how that agreement works, and any agreement would have to go before council and be approved by council, and kind of work out all those details at that time. But right now, we're still in the design phase.
I'll share that some of the comparable kitchens that we've studied in other jurisdictions that have a public-private partnership component, such as the Piedmont Food Processing Center in Orange County. There is a government subsidy and it usually starts out as it gets on its feet and gets the client base built. There's a subsidy that then eventually follows that. That's the hope. Of course, we're still early in this process of design and working out the RFQ for an operator. So I think it's a little too early to tell, but that's a possibility that it would be. Maybe have a subsidy at the beginning as an incubator would, and then eventually pay for itself.
Thank you.
I think isn't commercial there like commercial cooking?
Commercial
Right,
cooking
so it's
is
about the
intent.
type of kitchen for the regulatory compliance for it being a commercial kitchen versus like a residential or like a small kitchen. I think that's a different regulatory standard is what the commercial is there.
So meaning it's a fully permitted, so a restaurant or a food truck or a person that's canning salsa and they can sell it on the store shelf. So that's a commercial component of it. Good clarification.
Any timeline on when we may see this RFP or this proposal?
The RFQ is under design right now. We're putting that together right now. As you may know, the design of the kitchen is underway with Creech & Associates Architect, and you all approved last fall, and we're hoping to have that design finished probably this fall.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
Just a few more kind of projects. I just want to highlight some examples. The library, sound absorbing tiles. So this would be for the first floor lobby and the third floor public space. Just, kind of as people are gathered there, sound kind of travels, and so the library wants to, hopefully lessen that a little bit for those that are there for quieter reasons. Neighborhood traffic enhancements there at the bottom, that's kind of traffic calming measures, and so those, as they come up, these funds would be tapped for those. And so nothing specific at this time, but as they are, we'll have kind of a better idea on what kind of need is out there and what kind of funding may be needed later down the road. And lastly, just the North Main Street pedestrian improvements. Some funding was set aside last year. I know there's been several updates to property, livability, and safety with some much higher dollar amounts than $75,000, but knowing that there's some, maybe some potential smaller fixes or solutions or temporary solutions or whatever Mr. Venable and his team are able to, bring forward to council and ultimately approved by council, we wanted to have some funding set aside just so that's not a barrier to some of those potential next steps. Moving on to water sewer. Obsolete water lines and obsolete sewer lines. And so if you're familiar with the capital plan, you see that every year, usually around $1 million to $1.5 million. And so these are for scheduled and emergency. It does seem we hear more about some of the emergency repairs from Robbie Stone and his team more often. The SCADA system upgrade. So SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, in case anyone was unaware. So we've been putting funds aside for Ward and the East Side plant. This would also get the West Side plant as well as the incinerator at the East Side plant, and just kind of getting all those upgrades in place. About midway down, the wastewater plants and lift stations equipment replacement. The department cited kind of pump failures that just the nature of having a system are going to happen, and rather than having that pressure on their operating budget, they wanted to kind of set aside some capital funds to help pay for those because they are a little bit higher dollar in nature. Then on the NCDOT Highway 70 and 29 South Main improvements, that's the NCDOT project currently underway. They're at the Business 85 interchange. There's some water sewer component that the city will be responsible for. And then lastly, the Ward Water Treatment Plant capital projects. As this is mainly upgrades and improvements that will have to do with emerging contaminants. Looking at electric, those first four, area outdoor lighting, street lighting, downtown underground, and overhead to underground conversion, these are kind of recurring capital. Some of the conversions are happening on a regular basis. Others, like downtown underground, maybe more on an as-needed basis. I did talk with electric, and some recent downtown underground improvements were Commerce from Wren to Centennial, Green Drive at Elm, Broad Street at Elm, High Street at Broad Street, and Main Street at Parkway. And so it's kind of as needed and as things come up, but we want to have the funding available so electric's able to move on with those improvements. The East Chester Transformer 2 replacement, the current transformer is at its end of life. This is just kind of a scheduled replacement of that piece of equipment. NCDOT East Chester widening, this would be the electric component of that, and that widening is planned from Hickswood to Gallimore Dairy. And then lastly, I'll just note on the new MOC, it says construction, but those funds could also go toward land acquisition, and that's kind of a piecemeal. We want to start setting money aside, so if that project does get a green light, we kind of have the money ready to go for whatever happens with that particular project. Downtown Underground Showroom District, that's been, that's tied to the $9 million state grant that the Market Authority is receiving. That's one of our contributions to those improvements. And the Washington Street project, the $4 million, I believe engineering, when they did their department overview, they talked a little bit about what that project would entail.
My apologies, could you go back? I missed that. The downtown showroom district, that was our share of, but there's more from another grant?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We received a $9 million allocation from the state, and actually the allocation went to the High Point Market Authority. And the city's support of that was $3 million to complete that project.
Okay, thank you.
Briefly on transit, the 5 Points Transfer Hub acquisition construction, this would be to construct a small passenger waiting facility. I'll just note our local match for that project is 10%, so about $127,000. Operators training property acquisition, this would be to acquire property that could have a little bit more room for bus driver training and maneuvers. Our local match is in the 30% range, about $56,000. The Broad Avenue Terminal, current terminal there is made of wood, it's having some severe drainage issues and some deterioration, and so a replacement of that. Our local match is $25,000, so about 20%. And then paratransit vehicle replacement, and this is one that we kind of have ongoing. So current estimates are about $250,000 per vehicle. Our local match is 10% or $76,000. So $3.7 million, but as I noted earlier, the local commitment is about $284,000.
Is someone able to speak to the 5 Points Transfer Hub? Because I know some of us had not heard about this at all, and just to talk about the lines that will be meeting there, and because I know transportation is a very hot topic, and so it looks like there's a new line coming as well.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council, Damon Duquesne, Assistant City Manager. So this project is the same one we talked about in Washington with our delegation there. The 5 Points Hub is to allow for transfer on an east-west expansion of our routes. And so currently, everything has to come back, well, and north-south, because everything certain now comes back to our current transfer, and all the transfers happen down here. So to avoid having to come all the way downtown to make a switch to head back out, the transfer hub would be located further north to provide a more efficient and speedy, transfer to other routes and other destinations. A lot of that's going to be restudied when we do our short-range transit plan here in the very near future. Is that helpful?
What is the one forthcoming route? Is that?
So the first expansion that we hope to be able to do here, now that we have nearly enough drivers, will be the north-south. That's our most heavily, the north-south main route is our most heavily used route. So that's the one we want to extend the hours and be able to provide more service.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Parking deck improvements, so this is kind of just more major maintenance that may come up, nothing specific, but at this time, but when last year's council in the budget did increase some of the parking rates, part of that justification was to help kind of fund ongoing maintenance and capital, and this is just us starting to set funds aside so transportation is able to move forward those as they arise. Solid waste. That first project is just starting to set aside funds for future solid waste equipment replacement, things like compactors and balers at the MRF. Those aren't on fleet's replacement schedule. It's handled by solid waste, and so a tub grinder at Ingleside is $1.5 million. And so rather than having that big hit come in 1 year, we want to try and set money aside so when this equipment is up for replacement, it doesn't have as much of an impact to the budget on an annual basis. The MRF ongoing maintenance, this is an annual just for maintenance that comes up at the facility. Land development, land purchase, and the Kersey Valley Phase 1, 2, 4 post-closure reserve. Those are funded by our solid waste post-closure reserve funds. So they don't come from the landfill operating budget. The Kersey Valley Landfill Transfer Station, this is to set money aside so when Public Services is ready to start thinking about kind of the early stages of design for that, which is more for when the landfill is full, which is down the line. It's just kind of very early pre-planning. And then asphalt and underlayment. This is kind of road and concrete pad replacement. We've been funding it over the past few years. The Kersey Valley is already funded, but this adds Ingleside and Merv, so they can kind of do one big kind of project to knock all those out at once. And lastly, on capital, on the stormwater side, Mill Avenue stormwater drainage system repairs. This would be replacing the clay pipes with concrete. The CCTV trailer with equipment. This has reached its end of life. This is to replace that. And then the Rockford Rotary Ferris. So this would be to reduce stormwater issues within those drainage basins. And then, sorry, go ahead.
In terms of calculating the useful life, are we ahead of that? Are we looking at purchasing equipment ahead of that for maybe a cheaper rate? Or are we getting close to useful life when we start to look to replace equipment?
We're usually right at it, or if we could, depending on funding, if we could push another little, every ounce of life out of a piece of equipment while still being, so it doesn't affect service.
Well, my thinking is that if we calculate the useful life of the OEM based on OEM standards, like, do we get out ahead and possibly research that we could possibly buy this equipment or look at purchasing the equipment before we get to the end of useful life, maybe get earlier rates, have shorter lead times on equipment?
I can talk with Mr. Rogers and the fleet. We can get you a response, kind of see, what their thought process is on timing, especially in lieu of increased costs and supply chain issues where it takes, sometimes up to a year or even more before a piece of equipment will be delivered. So that is it on capital. And so the last area for slides were tax rate reduction scenarios. And so staff has compiled two separate reduction scenarios. And so the first one is a 2-cent rate reduction from the proposed budget. So the proposed budget has a 3-cent increase, so this would take 2 cents off of that. I will just note 1 cent generates about $1.362 million. And so
Say that one more time.
1,362,466 is the exact amount that a penny generates for next fiscal year. And so part of our mentality was kind of if it's new, it's going to be potentially considered, but not everything that's new is in the budget is on this list. And one thing you don't see here is some IT cybersecurity investments. We felt that those are critical enough that they would not be on kind of a new thing that wouldn't be on the list to kind of take out. And so eliminate the fire and the police market adjustments. So those combined are over 0.9 of a penny. So that's a large burden on the budget for next year. Eliminate the parking fund subsidy. So our thinking on this is, and our estimates show that we should be adding a fund balance this year, and we should have a substantial fund balance well above what we need for that fund. And so there's an advantage to having that fund balance for any major capital that comes up, but we feel that it can be eliminated, and then if fund balance gets spent down too much in the next few years, we can put together a long-term plan to bring the subsidy up without having to do it all in 1 year that could put pressure on a budget. Also reduce the average merit increase to 2.5%. It's currently at an average of 3%. Reduce the general capital allocation. And there is the action, just note, reducing capital does affect our ability to fund new capital projects in future years. But there, we could potentially look at some projects that, maybe instead of $350,000 for fire station upgrades, you could take $100,000 off that, and then they just do what's most critical and still funds the project. And so we probably evaluate what specific projects it needs, depending on if council wanted to go that route.
One item that I think is important for council to be aware of when we're looking at our capital, when you all are getting the budget, there are already a number of items that have already been taken out of the budget. And if you start to look at some of the age of our facilities, we're doing maintenance on facilities that are already older. And some of these reductions in capital, if we continue to make those, then we could be making a situation worse further down the road, which could cost us more. And especially when you think about some of our public safety facilities or recreation facilities, those facilities are old as they are. And really, we should be thinking about how we're replacing some of those facilities in the long term. And it would be difficult for us to make up that difference. We want to make sure that we provided you these options, but also want to make sure that we're sharing with you the implications of those as well.
Eliminating the library social work contract. So this is a new item for next year's budget, and so kind of with that mentality of, if it's new, maybe we need to not include it. And also, it says forgive the internal loan for the stadium. This would probably be more of deferring some of those payments to a later year, but that's kind of
Tell
another
a
one
little bit
that.
more about that. I mean, one of you guys.
Yeah.
What that actually means.
Sure. So when we invested in the Catalyst project and the stadium, part of that investment was bonds, right? And then the other part was an internal loan from the electric fund, the internal service fund, and the landfill development fund that we are paying back internally through tax dollars. So it's just an internal borrowing versus a bond issuance. So what is proposed here would be to forgive or defer 1 year of that repayment from the general fund to the, I believe the electric fund is what's being repaid currently in the schedule. So I believe that's what's being proposed here, would be either a forgiveness or 1 year or a deferral.
Deferring for a couple years and just reevaluating to still.
So forgive's not the right term.
Right.
I mean, the
Because
city
the
city is also,
defer.
Yeah.
I mean, the city is also the electric, so it's.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's essentially paying back your savings
Well,
after.
you're paying back another fund, really.
Right.
You're paying back, the electric utility, which had excess cash at the time that we needed the investment. And so the promise was essentially made at that point to repay the funds that we borrowed.
Yeah, we were just trying to put this in terms that, everyday folks were trying to understand you're essentially paying money back that you borrowed out of your savings, you put it back.
Correct. Yeah,
But
you're putting it back in a different pocket.
You put it in a different pocket, but at this point, we're talking about not deferring that repayment to your savings for a while. That gives us some flexibility in our budget so that we don't necessarily have to make an increase in the tax rate. Or we could reduce the proposed tax rate.
Councilman Andrew, you said that the library social work contract is new. What is the library social work contract? What do we get out of that?
So this would be to contract with, I believe, Mental Health Associates of the Triad, and they would have a social worker and a peer navigator position kind of dedicated to the library. Sometimes during the day, the library becomes kind of a public space for people that may need some assistance, and so library staff are there to run the library, not to, not equipped really to provide that assistance, and so this would, allow that resource for the folks that may be there.
Okay, so it's a contract social worker who resides at the library in
Yes.
case someone needs help.
Yes.
And they've had social work interns for a number of years, and I would assume this is an expansion of that idea.
Well, one thing about the intern population is it's cyclical. You have some
Yeah, it's not
years, and
year-round
and sometimes you don't. And so, with the rise of folks in need of mental health services, I can see how this would be establishing a full-time or a permanent, someone there would make sense for the library who's provided this service for several years.
The next slide would be a 1 cent tax rate reduction from the proposed budget, and so the bottom three are kind of carried over from the previous suggestions, but this would be to defer the fire and market adjustments to January. So we would budget for half the costs and we would incur half the costs. Now, the big caveat, if we do that, then we need to budget that full year in next year's budget. And when you see me standing up here and I say, what are drivers of increases in personnel spending? One of the first things I'm going to say is the full year's cost of the public safety adjustment. But it does provide a scenario where they're still able to be provided to police and fire. It's just implementation date is moved to later in the fiscal year.
So this goes back to
I want to mention to a few earlier, go back over what I asked the other night, Stephen, because I think it's important for people to know, especially for those of us that aren't fond of taxes, but they are a mechanism by which we provide services to the citizens. The way we are set up with Guilford County and our sales tax, you know, last year we gave a 3-cent reduction in the tax rate, and that caused us some losses in revenue. But also, and I want you to explain that. But also, I think that it's important to realize too that we are managing a budget in a time when consumer price inflation from January 2020 to January 2024 running at around 19.5%. So people are feeling, when they look at anything that says an increase, you know, it has such a bad taste and igniting inflammatory or whatever you want to call it, negative connotation. And I don't like them either, but when you're trying to operate the city as a business, you are dealing with that consumer price inflation all over the place, and our departments and our employees. So it's a tough time to be doing a budget, and it is just a budget. But I'll still think about which way I like the options, but it's a challenging time to do a budget.
And to answer your question about, so sales tax distribution in Guilford County particularly is based on what's called the ad valorem distribution, which means it's our proportion of property tax revenues compared to all the other jurisdictions in Guilford County. So for that to change, your valuation needs to go up or down, or your tax rate needs to go up and down, and that will change how much property tax revenue you get. So a few years back during the revaluation, High Point reduced the rate by 3 cents. Guilford County kept their rate the same that year. And so by them then having a higher proportion, that affected the distribution percentage. And then last year, the city of Greensboro increased taxes. We kept ours the same. And so there's a year delay before those changes are made. And so for next year, our projections have Greensboro's percentage going up because the proportion is higher, and ours going down and Guilford County going down. The other jurisdictions are all get less than 1% distributed, so their actions have less of an impact than it's really what Greensboro does, what Guilford does, or what High Point does. And by what Greensboro did, which they had to do what they had to do, there's no commentary on that, but our estimates have us losing about $815,000 in sales tax for next year, just based on what we think and estimate those new distribution percentages to be.
Thank you.
Does Mayor Jefferson or Councilwoman Peters have any comments and would like to be recognized virtually?
Real quick, Tim, thank you. I've been listening and following along, and it sounds like what those opportunities to be able to do a 1 cent, 2 cent reduction, and I'm probably oversimplifying here, but it sounds like it's either capital projects and those not being as high, or it's paying back that fund balance, as you call it in PT. I think you call it kind of like paying back our savings, if you will. What was good, it doesn't sound like we're trying to discuss here is reducing any cost of personnel, which I think I've said this before. Actually, sorry, thank you. This is not seeing the screen, so it's not actually said. 16 was supposed to 2 items in terms of the fire market adjustment, police market adjustment. I don't know that we can afford to do that. I think Councilman Moore spent some time talking about the impact from January 2020 to January 2024 on customer pricing inflation. and what that's meant for people and how everyone's feeling the pressures of that. What folks who are also feeling the pressures include our employees. And I've said this in some conversations, I just want to make sure I can say it here for our group. When the last county evaluation happened that increased property values, it increased the revenue that governments have been receiving. And when you have it where most governments, and when I say most, I would say probably overwhelming majority, when most governments are choosing to take that property value increase and stay at whatever that rate is and use that margin to invest in what they need to invest in, then they're able to accommodate personnel market adjustments way better than we've been able to accommodate it. And to me, I think there is a correlation that I might say causes the direct connection between us not having that same margin and then us also having what I would consider to be salaries that no longer are as competitive as they need to be. And so some years ago we made that adjustment, and I appreciate that we did it to in some ways be revenue neutral. But, and I don't mean to call other governments competitors, but in some ways they are, because they're looking for the same talent that we're looking for. When our competitors don't make that same adjustment and they use that margin to increase salaries, and kind of makes it where now we're playing catch up. And if there's one thing I'm not comfortable with is asking our folks, not just in police and fire, but folks in public works, folks who are doing the services. I'm just not comfortable asking them to continue to be delayed when we're already struggling to fill vacancies right now. If you tell me that the city manager and her team want to fill vacancies and that there's a myriad of ways to do it, well, one way that is a surefire way to kill her chances is to not offer the competitive salaries that need to be offered. And I'm not saying that the salaries you offer now are not still serviceable, but if they need to be adjusted to ensure that we can retain great talent, then we should do that. And I would be preaching to the choir if I attempted to explain the importance of our folks in fire and police who put their lives on the line every day and what the costs are for that. I know I would be preaching to the choir, so I'm not going to waste time doing that. But I appreciate looking at this, what the opportunities are.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilwoman Peters, any comments? If not,
I have some.
Councilman Dr. Harmon.
Sure. I mean, I sent this email out the other day, asking, I mean, the general fund balance is, it was over 20-some billion now. About the I guess I was hinting at the possibilities of using some of the general fund balance. Shaking his head. Because, I mean, it's been going up every year and it's just sitting there, and we're above kind of the threshold that we need for local government. I'm not going to sort of defer some of the property tax increase.
So, well, Councilmember Herman, we'll address the fund balance piece. I will say, and this is kind of back when we were also talked about our ARPA allocation. We have to make sure that we're very careful that we're not using our fund balance to support ongoing costs or recurring costs in the budget. So I think that's always the first caveat. And typically, if we're going to use fund balance for anything, it needs to be things that are kind of a one-time expenditure, where we know there's not going to be the recurring costs. There was also a question that came up about kind of the 8% fund balance that, depending on how you're reading it, that some jurisdictions feel like is the minimum threshold that cities are supposed to have, and our policy is saying 10%. So I'll ask Bobby if he'll actually walk through that, and we have a chart that's in front of you that we're going to walk through that actually goes into a little bit more detail about how we actually allocate the fund balance that's needed for an organization our size.
So, good afternoon. I do want to clarify a couple things. So the 8% that's often referenced, some will swear by it. It's essentially 1 month of your budget, right? Cash on hand. That has been the standard for as long as I've been aware of government finance. Many people have based their policies on it. That's, I'm sure, how we arrived at 10% whenever we arrived at 10%. Greensboro, I'm sure that's how they arrived at 9% because it was slightly above the 8%. However, the LGC will tell you that has never been a requirement. So it's always been the guidance, and if you ask anybody that works in finance, they'll tell you it came from the LGC, but you can't find it written down anywhere. So 8% has kind of been that long time rule. The City of High Point's 10% is obviously more conservative than that, and that is what our current policy is. And the chart you see there has, the 10% policy over time, going back the last 10 years. And I apologize for not writing 10% there, but that'll kind of show you the trend that we've seen. And you can see back in fiscal 18, we actually dipped way below that 10% policy. Management took some steps at the time to regain that. And there was some timing issues with some fire trucks we were purchasing at the time that essentially we didn't match up the debt issuance with the purchase. And so we dipped below momentarily, but we recovered the next year. But it's really only the past 2 or 3 years of the extraordinary increase we saw in sales tax, those double-digit increases that nobody saw coming and that nobody wanted to keep growing at that rate because we've never seen it before. So the combination of the sales tax and the vacancy savings from vacancy issues that every government has faced the past couple of years led to this build in fund balance. I will add that we've been able to successfully use that fund balance because we've added it. Earlier this year, we appropriated some monies to it, an agreement that the council entered into. So we're able to strategically use that for one-time purchases when they come up. The next area I want to show you is the LGC in fiscal 2020, after our audit, released these guidelines of you're supposed to have 25% fund balance. We've never heard of 25% fund balance before, so it caught us all off guard, but what they're nice enough to do is let us use our debt service fund savings as well to get to that 25%. There's a complicated reason for that, but it's over all cities across North Carolina, that's where they're basing it. And they have these groupings based on general fund revenue, and they stop at 10 million or more. So we're compared to the same city that has a $10 million and $1 general fund budget, even though we have a $130 million plus general fund budget. So we're all expected to have that 25% now. We do not have that 25% in our policy. What we've found is that the 10% policy and our 50% policy on the debt service fund have allowed us to stay in compliance with that. I will say I haven't seen a policy that says 25% yet, and I'm looking for them, but I think what most people are doing is still using that 8% or 10% around for general fund, and then a conservative debt service fund model to maintain that 25%. We're currently sitting at around 30%. I don't think we're going to drop below that. Steve's projections have us adding a little to fund balance, but at 25%, what the LGC is telling you is that you should add a quarter to your savings account for every dollar you add to budget. And that's a big number to maintain. So what we do is when we make the recommendation for fund balance use, we review where we're at along that policy, and we determine, do we think we're going to maintain the 25% the LGC expects before we make that recommendation.
Well, can't we apply it to the general capital allocation then, since that's capital and not ongoing expenses?
Typically, if we're going to use fund balance on projects, what we'll do is we'll want to wait and get through at least our first quarter of our budget just to see how all of our revenues are coming in. But we try to stay away from budgeting fund balance up front as part of our budget process. If we see that revenues are coming in and capital projects can be added back in, if they're cut out as part of this process, then we'll start bringing those items to council as we see how revenues are coming in. But we don't budget those on the front end. But if that's something that council wants to consider changing, that practice, then please let us know. But it's trying to be as conservative as possible until we see how those revenues are coming in, and we'll bring those items back to you if we see that we're trending in the right direction.
Personally, I mean, we're just sitting on the money. I mean, stuff comes up, stuff breaks, and all that sort of stuff, but it doesn't seem like a good use of taxpayer dollars is having sitting there in the bank without planning. I know we got that general plan, but it just seems, to go from 16 million a few years ago, and now it's 26 or whatever. That's a lot of sense to me.
Well, this is the essence of these budget work sessions, for us to be able to share our ideas on what the budget should look like and inputs. And so, and perfect segue into the next steps for Stephen, if you would.
Yes, sir, thank you. So just kind of next steps or kind of with the calendar, looks like, so Monday, public hearing at the city council meeting. Next Wednesday, in this room at 4 p.m., we'll have our next scheduled budget work session. Planned agenda topics include responses to any questions that may come up between now and then. And then we'll also have representatives from the Market Authority, Visit High Point, and Downtown High Point, Inc. And they'll be presenting kind of things going on with their organizations and also their budgets for next year. And then just looking ahead, a few weeks down the road, Wednesday, May 29th, if needed, there's a budget work session scheduled for 4 p.m. And then Monday, June 3rd at the City Council meeting, tentative date for adoption of the FY25 budget.
All right, thank you. At this point, members of council, we open it up for any further questions that you may have. I'd just like to add in our discussion, we have to think about the constraints that all the sectors are under. And I can tell you now that a large driver of cost increases across the board in any sector is labor. The availability of labor, the cost of labor. And so when we think about the efficiency of things like chemicals, the production of chemicals and how we ultimately receive those, companies are producing those and they're facing the same labor constraints and costs as everyone else. And so that actually drives it up for the city. And so we have to think about that as we go forward in crafting our budgets. But that being said, we open the floor for any further questions from members of council.
Yeah, Council Manager, I don't want to add any extra burden to the staff, but this budget, is it on like one Excel spreadsheet I can play with? Because I'll be happy to do it myself, but if it's already there, we can make, write scripts and make adjustments. I have some ideas, but.
Let us take a look at what we have. We may have something that may be very in the weeds detailed, but.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'll be happy to do that.
Yeah, we'll take a look and we'll let you know.
Is that what you do in your fun time, Tim?
That's what I'm going to do with my fun time now.
Yeah, I did one the other day for page 39.
Nice. All right. I'm sorry,
And
Steve.
I will just note if there are questions that come up between now and Monday evening's public hearing or after the public hearing or prior, please don't hesitate to reach out. We can research ahead of time if we need to, or as you saw today, if we're able to answer it during the meeting, we're able to do so.
All right, and for those listening in the public, Monday is the public hearing. At that point, comments you can sign up to speak at the public hearing if you so choose to. If there are no other questions or items from council or staff, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Councilwoman by McKeever. Sorry. I was hearing a whole bunch of voices and seconded by Councilman Moore. Any discussion on the item? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.